Before he became one of the famous explorers of Africa, David Livingstone spent 10 years in the wilderness, not just crossing deserts and rivers, but facing failure, doubt, and discovery. So what did Livingstone really do between 1846 and 1856? Well, let's take a look. When we last left Livingstone, it was 1845. He was happily married to Mary Moffat Livingstone, and they had left the home he'd prepared for them in Mabasa due to a disagreement with a fellow missionary. The name of Livingstone's new station was Chanywe. It was situated some 40 miles from Mabasa, and in 1846 became the center of Livingstone's operations among the Bakwans and their chief, Shishele. But Livingstone would not stay still over the next 10 years. In this time, he would travel extensively around the African continent, and this 10-year scope of travel will be the focus of this video. Now, before we get started, we want to share that this video may have less graphics, pictures, videos throughout due to the lengthy text we will be reading and the time constraint of trying to get it together. It'll have to be a little bit simpler this time around. I do apologize for that. And that serves as a reminder to you that the majority of the text for this video comes from books written by Livingstone himself or by those who lived during his time or actually knew him. So we will do our best to include a list of those books in the description so you can pick up a copy and read them yourself. And by using the links we have in the description, you are helping the channel, for which we are very grateful. But now on with the journeys of David Livingstone. The rumor of a great lake in the interior of southern Africa had long been current among the colonists. A rumor like this aroused the curiosity and stirred the enterprise of Livingstone. He resolved to discover what there was to be found beyond the terrible Kalahari Desert, which had hitherto proved the great obstacle to explorers. This desert, like Sahara of the South, was a region supposed to be absolutely without water, and it seemed hopeless to attempt to cross it with men and animals requisite to carry provisions. But the desert could be skirted, so the doctor determined to solve the question of the Great Southern Lake. Fortunately, there were two Englishmen, travelers and sportsmen, Murray and Oswell, who were delighted to join in such an expedition. They started from Calabang on June 1st, 1849. With wagons, bullocks, and a retinue of native servants and hunters. For 300 miles, the route lay through a dreary and sterile region, with scarcely any vegetation except occasional patches of cactus or wait-a-bit thorns and other plants that could subsist on the arid soil. Water could be rarely obtained, sometimes after days of interval, and the drought caused immense distress to the travelers and their cattle. After proceeding for a month in a northerly direction, they emerged from this arid region and on July 4th found themselves on the banks of a stately river, the Zoga, flowing to the east. A broad belt of reeds and rushes fringed the stream with trees and shrubs, above all which rose gigantic baobab trees, some of them 60 or 70 feet in circumference, with beautiful parasitic plants and creepers hung in festoons from the branches. Here and there the water ran in deeper channel through limestone rocks. The freshness of the vegetation and the beauty of the scenery recalled to the doctor his native Clyde, and he was cheered and gladdened by the prospect. Learning from the natives on its borders that the river flowed from a distant lake, the travelers ascended its course, and after journeying about 300 miles, following the windings of the stream, they joyfully beheld on August 1st the bright sunlit expanse of the often rumored and long mysterious lake. The natives gave it various names, but that which most pleased the travelers was Ngami, the waters, and that was the name adopted by geographers. The lake was not found on examination to be as large as it was first anticipated, but it is a fine sheet of water all the same. It is about 70 miles in circuit, widest at the ends with less breadth in the middle. The Zoga, which is the chief outlet after a long course, is lost in an immense marsh or salt flat, a perfect forest of reeds, the haunt of vast herds of buffaloes, crocodiles, hippopotamus, and other amphibious animals abounded, and the surrounding country literally swarmed with every kind of game, from the ponderous elephants to the most graceful of the deer tribes. Since the way had been open to hunters and traders, and the sound of firearms been heard, the animals had rapidly decreased, and the sportsmen had to resort to wilder regions. But this does not lessen the interest with which we read of the discovery of Lake Ngami. It was the discovery which first made the name of Livingstone familiar to geographers and men of science, the Royal Geographical Society having awarded to him one half of the royal premium for the year 1849 of the value of 25 guineas in the shape of a gold chronometer watch. Livingstone was very unwilling to retrace his steps, and would fain have continued his northward exploration, especially on learning that he was only about 10 days' journey from the Makalolo tribes, whose chief, Sebitwane, he had previously heard of as being anxious to be brought in communication with the white men. But at that time he had not the means of advancing, and the travelers returned to Kolobeng. Anxious to renew the attempt to reach Sebitwane and his Makolos, Livingstone started again from Kolobeng in April 1850. This time accompanied by Mrs. Livingstone and 3 children, and by Shishele and 20 of the Bakwanans. It was a long and weary journey to the lake, and then an outbreak of fever, with reports of the ravages of the tsetse fly, brought him to a standstill. An unexpected hindrance was added. The chief, where he had halted, was either jealous or afraid of the white men going to Sebitwane. It was only by parting with his own rifle, the gift of a friend, that the chief was appeased. Livingstone felt the importance of retaining his friendship, as he would have to leave his wife and children under his charge when he went forward. But when 2 of his children were laid down with fever, and the advance seemed impracticable, he returned once more to Kolobeng, where Mrs. Livingstone, soon after, gave birth to her 4th child, to live, however, for only a few weeks. It was the first death in our family, the doctor says in his journal, but was just as likely to have happened had we remained at home, and we now have one of our number in heaven. We now move ahead to 1852, and there is a report in the Journal of the Royal Geographical Society of a paper by Dr. Livingstone and Mr. Oswell on the greatest explorations in Central Africa beyond Lake Ngami. In this communication, the doctor gives some account of the country where he then was and of its ruler, with whose character he was much struck. The travelers remained for more than 2 months in his village on the river Chobe, and were most hospitably treated. Mr. Oswell stated that above 80 tribes paid him tribute, and that his influence extended over a circle of 800 to 1,000 miles. Dr. Livingstone writes about Sebitwane, the powerful chief who originally fled north after his tribe, the Mantatis, were repelled in 1824. Along the way he fought through various tribal territories and eventually settled near the Chobe and Shishiki rivers. When Sebitwane learned of Livingstone's attempt to explore his land, he eagerly tried to help. He sent men to find them, offered cattle to other chiefs to secure guides, and even traveled 300 miles south to be closer to Livingstone and the English traders. When we met, he seemed overjoyed, and having remarked that our cattle had been bitten by the tsetse fly and would certainly die, said, "Never mind, I have plenty and will give you as many as you need." He then appeared anxious to remove us to the northern or safe side of the Chobe River, and also to be near his town of Linyata. But when he saw that our wagons were too large for his canoes, he ordered the people of the town to remove to our resting place. A few days afterwards, however, and when the new village was quickly springing up, he became ill, and after lingering a fortnight, to our great regret, died. Such is the note about the chief in a narrative intended for publication. It is a calm, almost cold statement compared with the warmth of feeling expressed in his own journal, and we quote both because we have in them a more characteristic example of the contrast in what was meant for the public eye and the utterances of Livingstone's own heart. Although Livingstone had known Sebitwane for only a short time, he had the deepest regard for him. Here is Livingstone's writings on him. Dear Sebitwane, my heart bleeds for thee, and what would I not do for thee now? I will weep for thee to the day of my death. Little didst thou think when, in the visit of the white man, thou sawest the long-cherished desires of years accomplished, that the sentence of death had gone forth. Thou thoughtest that thou shouldst procure a weapon from the white man, which would be a shield from the attacks of the fierce Matabele. But a more deadly dart than theirs was aimed at thee, and though thou couldst well ward off a dart, none, ever better, thou didst not see that of the King of Terrors. I will weep for thee, my brother, and I would cast forth my sorrows in despair for thy condition. But I know that thou wilt receive no injustice where thou art gone. Shall not the judge of all the earth do right? I leave thee to him. Alas, alas, Sebitwane, I might have said more to him, God forgive me from blood guiltiness. God forgive me from blood guiltiness. If I had said more of death, I might have been suspected as having foreseen the event and as guilty of bewitching him. I might have recommended Jesus and his great atonement more. It is, however, very difficult to break through the thick crust of ignorance which envelops their minds. The chief had been present at the first Sunday service held by the missionary, and had listened with interest to his conversation. But Livingstone regretted that he had not spoken more to him. So tender was his conscience, and so deep his own sense of spiritual realities. In his book of missionary travels, no pages are more interesting than those referring to Sebitwané, and no incident into his intercourse with the natives of Africa gives more insight into the lofty character and generous heart of Livingstone. It was when residing at the village of Sebitwane on the Chobe that the travelers first heard of the great Zambezi River, and of the wonderful falls, which were visited on a later expedition. Traveling in a northwest direction after passing through Linyanta, they came on a fine river, called by the natives the Shishake, afterwards found to be the Zambezi. We thank God for permitting us to see the glorious river. How magnificent! It was the first river I ever saw, says Livingstone. A series of rapids above the town of Shishake compels the boatmen to drag their canoes some distance along the shore, and about 80 miles below the same point a waterfall is reported, the spray and noise arising from which are so considerable as to have led to the name Moi e Tuenye, or smoke sounding. The spray is said to be visible 10 miles off. This was the first hint of the existence of the Victoria Falls of the Zambezi River, one of the discoveries with which Livingstone's name is associated. Now, the rumor of the falls is mentioned by him in a paper to the Geographical Society, already referred to. His chief interest, now as ever in his explorations, was the prospect of opening up new fields for missions, and seeking the welfare of the native people. Writing to the directors of the London Missionary Society, he says, "You will see by the accompanying sketch map what an immense region God in His grace has opened up. If we can enter in and form a settlement, we shall be able in the course of a very few years to put a stop to the slave trade in that quarter. And again, I am curious that though there is much impurity in my motives, they are, in the main, for the glory of Him to whom I have devoted myself. I never anticipated fame from the discovery of the Lake Ngami. I cared very little about it, but the sight of the rivers and countries beyond, all densely populated, awakened many and enthusiastic feelings. Consider the multitudes that, in the providence of God, have been brought to light in the country of Sebitwane. The probability that in our efforts to evangelize we shall put a stop to the slave trade in a large region, and by means of the highway into the north which we have discovered, bring unknown nations into the sympathies of the Christian world." After this, his third journey, the intrepid missionary determined to send his wife and children home to England, partly for their safety and welfare, and partly that he might be able to devote himself more thoroughly to his plans for opening up Central Africa to commercial enterprise and Christian civilization. So it was on April 23, 1852, Mrs. Livingstone and her 4 children sailed from Cape Town. He was detained till June 8th, having much preparation to make for his next journey. He also took advantage of the delay to obtain instructions from the Astronomer Royal, Mr. afterwards Sir Thomas McClure, who was one of his best friends in future years. He did not arrive at Kuruman till the end of August. It was then he heard of the murderous raid of the Boers on the Bakwans of Kolobeng, and the destruction by them of his own home and the mission station. It was a providential thing that he was not there at the time, but had gone on to the Cape with his family, for the Boers would have murdered him, so enraged were they at his befriending the natives. The books of a good library, my solace in our solitude, were torn to pieces and scattered about. My stock of medicines were smashed, and all our furniture and clothing carried off and sold by public auction to pay the expenses of the foray. In a letter to his wife, and in other forms, the doctor has given utterance to indignant expressions as to this wanton and barbarous outrage. So everything wasn't going smoothly for Livingstone. There were times of deaths of chiefs that he was hoping to reach, and then attacks by tribes of people who did not care that he was reaching other people, and so there's issues going on. But Livingstone doesn't let that stop him. And from here, he's going to attempt to travel from sea to open up trade routes in Africa. So in 1850, Livingstone had proposed a bold plan to cross Africa from sea to sea, seeking healthier regions for mission work and a route to the coast. After failed attempts due to Boer hostility, he traveled alone with only native companions to Lintana in 1853, where local leader Sekatula warmly received him. Despite flooded terrain and difficult travel, the Makolo people helped him transport wagons across rivers, and thousands gathered to see the unfamiliar sights. Now, unable to find a suitable mission site, Livingstone aimed for the west coast, choosing the Portuguese town of Luanda. The 800-mile journey was perilous. Tribes were corrupted by the slave trade, food was scarce, and threats were constant. His faith helped him keep the group safe, and eventually a Portuguese trader helped him reach Casango, and colonial authorities provided aid. In May 1854, they reached Luanda, where British consul Mr. Gabriel welcomed them. Livingstone was deeply moved to sleep in a bed after 6 months on the ground. His Makolo companions were astonished by the sights of civilization, and though offered passage home, Livingstone refused, unwilling to abandon his African friends to face the dangerous return journey alone, showing his loyalty and deep sense of duty. Luanda was left on September 20th, 1854, and the return trip to Lanyata covered new ground for Livingstone. He remained at Lanyata for a little time. He then prepared for his journey toward the eastern coast. It was November 3rd before a start was made. The doctor, being accompanied by Sekeletu and 200 men, were all fed at the chief's expense. They traveled till they came within sound and sight of the famed falls of the Zambezi, called by Livingstone Victoria Falls. Now today, everyone is familiar by description and by picture of this magnificent wonder of the world. No account has been more graphic than that first published in the volume of Missionary Travels by Livingstone. Now the whole is too long to quote, but the following paragraph describes the approach to the smoke-sounding cataract. When about a half-mile from the falls, I left the canoe by which I had come thus far, and embarked in a lighter one, manned by the natives well acquainted with the rapids, who, availing themselves of the eddies and pools caused by the jutting rocks, brought me to an island in the middle of the river, and on the very edge of the lip over which the water rolls. In coming hither there was a danger of being swept down by the currents, which rushed along on each side of the island. But the river was now low, otherwise it would have been impossible to reach the spot. From the end of the island where we first landed, though it was within a few yards of the falls, yet no one could perceive where the vast body of water went. It seemed to lose itself in the earth, disappearing into a transverse fissure, only 80 feet wide. Creeping with awe to the extremity of the island, I peered down into a large rent which had been made from bank to bank of the broad Zambezi, and saw that a stream 1,000 yards broad leaped down 100 feet, and then became suddenly compressed into a space of 15 or 20 yards. The falls are simply caused by a crack made in a hard basalt rock from the right to the left bank of the Zambezi, and then prolonged from the left bank through 30 or 40 miles of hills. In looking down into the fissure on the right of the island, nothing is visible but a dense white cloud, which at the time we visited the spot had 2 bright rainbows on it. From this cloud a great jet of vapor, exactly like steam, mounted up to the height of 200 or 300 feet, and then condescending, changed its hue to that of dark smoke, and came back in a constant shower, which soon wetted us to the skin. Subsequent explorations have added much to our ideas of the grandeur of the scene, both as to the vastness of the volume of water and the depth of the descent. We still read with intense interest Livingstone's account of his first impressions on discovering Victoria Falls. Soon after rejoining the navigable part of the river, the explorer was rewarded for all his toils and sufferings. He discovered a highland region, free from tangled woods and pestilential marshes, with a fertile soil carpeted with short grass, stretching away to the eastward from the confluence of the Kafu with the Zambezi. Filled with thankfulness at having at last found a suitable site for mission station, he pursued his eastward course. Though food was plenty and game abundant, David Livingstone's journey grew more difficult after reaching Zumbo, where he first saw signs of Europeans. As he traveled east, hostile encounters with natives increased, his oxen died from tsetse flies, canoes were unavailable, and travel became increasingly harsh. He struggled on foot to a place where Portuguese officials welcomed him, but he was still 300 miles from the coast, and he didn't reach Quilomane until May 26th. There, the British government, having tracked his journey, sent HMS Start to receive him. Later, HMS Frolic brought him to Mauritius, where he arrived August 12th. From there, he sailed for England in November and landed at Dover on December 9th, 1856, the first time he had set foot on British soil in almost 15 years. A day or two later, he met Mrs. Livingstone at Southampton, where she had expected he would land. This is where we will leave Livingstone, back home with his family. Now, we do hope you will join us again next week as we learn more about the life, travels, and ministry of missionary David Livingstone. We're going to focus a little bit more on his hero's welcome back in England in that episode. It'll be a little bit better structured. This one kind of hopped all over the place, trying to condense down as much of this first section of journeys as possible and kind of giving us the highlights of what transpired. It probably will also be a much shorter episode. Thank you for those who have listened all the way through. We greatly appreciate it. If you are enjoying this series on David Livingstone, please share it with a friend and make sure to like and subscribe so you get to see the next episodes. We would greatly appreciate it. Thank you so much.